guys, we're trying something a little new here at the Gait Guys podcast. We're doing sound bites. We're basically breaking down old podcasts, or more recent podcasts that is, into sound bites on topics so that we can distribute the information in a little bit more of a simple fashion for everyone. It'll allow us to refer people to certain pieces, and it'll allow you guys to find things that you've been looking for. Say you heard it on one of the podcasts, you want to go back and find it again, to send over to a friend or for your own interest. It's there and available for you in a small soundbite rather than having to search a whole podcast. So hopefully this will serve a lot of people, including ourselves, on several levels here. Certainly going to take up some time, which is why we're going to be launching that Patreon account here. Little things like that take time. They take time is money, all that nonsense. But hopefully you guys appreciate this. If you enjoyed this little segment, send it over to your friends, share it on social media. We're trying to get the word out. And it's podcast 138. We hope you enjoy this. And again, we're on iTunes and everywhere else. Check it out there.
Well, the reason I asked is because one thing that I tend to cue more and more into, and this may be a topic that we have, discussed before, but it's worth probably going over again, or at least touching on it from maybe another perspective, is arm swing. And I find the further I go into my practice of watching people walk and looking for aberrancies, arm swing is one of the first things I always cue into. I think it's just easier to see than some of the other mechanical events down low. But it's becoming quite obvious that whenever there is an aberrant arm swing, meaning one side is swinging maybe forward more than the other side, or one side is maybe swinging a little bit more posteriorly on the other, or the arm is abducted, or the arm is coming across the body, I tend to immediately go down into the lower extremity on the opposite side and look for a clue that plays off of that. Now, this goes very nicely into the discussions we've been having over the last two, I think, podcasts 135 and 136 on arm swing and head over foot and all of those things. And although I still haven't changed my mind on that, I think my mind has gone a little bit deeper into some of these things. And it was really cued by our last podcast, or our last online CE presentation, where we looked at that bird's eye view of our client, or of a stick drawing of a client. And looking down on that person, when we saw the arm forward, for example, right arm is forward in an arm swing, and obviously left foot is forward in leg swing, that those two were coupled in similar motions, external rotation and flexion. And the obviously the limbs that are behind us are in extension and internal rotation.
Actually, I think you got it. No, never mind. No, you had it right. No, yeah. You got it right. External rotation in flexion, internal rotation and extension. Yeah.
Right. So somewhere in the midst of there, and then I decided to do a post over on our page and Facebook on adduction, and this kind of goes back to that some of the training that some people are doing, where they're crossing the arm across the body for arm swing to create some kind of a pump type effect or a thrusting effect across the body.
Yeah, it's a great way to create a crossover gait.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and if you think about it, if your scapula is set backwards, in order to pump your arm across your body, you're going to create some impingement at the glenohumeral joint. So the only way to get around that is to create either more scapular protraction and thoracic rotation to get that arm across the body. So now you're coaching actually thoracic rotation, perhaps more than is normal. And I guess that's where I'm going with this, is that a lot of the times when I see an aberrant arm swing, I often will put the patient down in a quadruped position on their hands and knees and have them do a thoracic rotation, reaching one hand up to the ceiling to see how their thoracic rotation is. And lo and behold, on the arm that has aberrant swing, quite frequently I see a impaired thoracic rotation ability. So because they can't create normal thoracic rotation, they're creating more shoulder or scapular protraction to get the arm to cross. And that's one way that they're trying to make up for a lack of arm swing, which then leads to a impaired leg swing. Do you have some thoughts on that? Because thoracic rotation is obviously somewhere between leg swing and arm swing. It's that thoracic canister between the upper and lower limb. What are your thoughts on that? And is that something that you assess?
Yeah, we assess it. I think it's super important. lumbar spine's not going to have a ton of range of motion. You only have 5 degrees from L1 to L5, with most of that occurring at L5S1, depending upon facet orientation. So piggybacking on what you said, one thing that we always do, if people have a pretty moderate difference from side to side with arm swing, is we'll shoot a quick AP like thoracolumbar shot, and we look at the orientation of the facets. So generally speaking, the facet joints in the thoracic spine should be largely in the coronal plane, and then at T12L1, and then at L1 through L5, they should be sagittal, and then at L5S1, they should be coronal again. And sometimes with individuals that have over or under rotation on one side, what you do is you'll see aberrances in their facet joint orientation. In other words, the facet joint, you have a tropism. You have a sagittal facet on one side and a coronal on the other. And what that'll do on the sagittal facet side is allow more rotation on that side. So if the right side was sagittal, left side was coronal, from rotating from left to right, I'd have an increased amount of rotation that's going to occur there. So that's one of the things that we look at quite frequently. And the other day, we had this gal come in that had, and this wasn't as much a thoracic rotation problem, although she did have some aberrances in her gait, but she had a facet tropism at L4 and L5, and they were on opposite sides. So she had a sagittal, normally at L5S1, we should have coronal facets, and she was sagittal on one side, coronal on the other, and then the exact opposite one level above, which is the first time I've ever seen it in, 20-something years of practice. But it was right at the area where she's having all the back pain. So we needed to have a little discussion about thoracic and lumbar canister mechanics and moving like a log, and hinging from the hips and things like that, so that she doesn't continually aggravate it. But, for people like that, great sports like bowling, which is wonderful for your lumbar spine, golf, unilateral rotational activities are certainly going to be something which is limited. But we assess arm swing. I had a gal in that came to see me yesterday, a sprinter hurdler, from another place in the state, and same deal, lots and lots of increased crossover, and arms just coming way across the body, creating just more rotation than was physically possible at that level, creating some degree of irritation. And she had other things that played into it, with an anterior pelvic tilt and an increased lumbar curve. Now you're already predisposing that area to over-rotation because of biomechanics. And then you superimpose that on top of that, and it just creates more problems. So in a very long-winded and roundabout way, yes, we do assess that.
Yeah, it's become more and more clear that on the referrals that I get from outside sources, that they're not looking at posture as much as they should. And I mean, in order to get normal scapular function, and thus normal arm swing, so let's take a step back. You need to have normal thoracic movement, and the big one that everybody tends to lose is thoracic extension and thoracic rotation. In order to have normal scapular motion, you have to have normal thoracic motion. In order to get normal glenohumeral motion, you have to have normal scapular thoracic stability and mobility. And so there's this, peel back of problems. And so if you see someone with maybe some aberrant arm swing or shoulder pain, you need to look at the scapular-thoracic interval to see if it's mobile and if it's stable. And one of the ones that tends to be overlooked is enough thoracic extension, particularly in the sprinters that I see. And then as of late, they tend to be a lot of high school and college kids who are spending most of their day sitting. They don't have a lot of thoracic extension, so they tend to be in more scapular protraction and elevation, which tends to pull that glenohumeral joint more into a position where arm swing across the body is more prevalent. And we see this in a lot of runners where they just tend to lose their posture, particularly the distance runners, over time, and they tend to slump a little bit more, which causes the arm swing to cross the body a little bit. And instead of coaching less crossing arm swing, we should be coaching more postural scapular positioning and thoracic mobility and extension, and then trying to stabilize that in their gait. And those are the types of things that will help with reducing the the crossover gait in the lower limbs. So it's just becoming more and more prevalent that this arm swing thing is a real problem. And when coached inappropriately, because of lack of knowledge of normal mechanics, you tend to force a arm swing that you would like, as opposed to the one that the patient should, or the client or athlete should be using on their own. So we do a lot of thoracic mobilizations now, self-mobilizations, corrective exercises, if you will, in thoracic extension and rotation to try and restore at least the spinal component, so that the scapular component improves, so that the arm swing component improves. And most people are rather shocked at how limited they are in thoracic rotation and extension. So just a little cue for all you guys to look at these things and make sure that you're assessing that component when you see an arm swing that you don't like. So, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and just going along with that, when you have those people that have limited thoracic extension, in a lot of those folks, we see that they have either A, loss of ankle rocker, B, loss of hip extension, so their Z angle is diminished on one end or the other, or both. And sometimes, and you see this all the time as well, on the table, like one of those or both of those are fine. Like they've got plenty of ankle dorsiflexion, they got plenty of hip extension, but they don't use it. But more times than not, in those people with a thoracic restriction, we see a restriction in one or both of those. And what they're trying to do is just borrow from the thoracic spine to try to get the extension that they can't get. And you see this a lot on, and we've done lots of posts on this. We'll have a picture of a runner from like the front of Runner's World or something. And it's like, he looks like he's got great form. And you look at him, it's like he's got no hip extension. It's all occurring in the lumbar spine. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite clear when we've done many posts on this over time that the legs tend to run that motor program and are reflected in how the arm swing will move. And the arm swing basically is used to shape and maybe mildly affect the leg swing, but the leg swing does tend to trump that. So if you're pumping your arms across your body, you're going to be, meaning crossing midline, you're going to be, as you said earlier, pushing a crossover gait, and vice versa. If you're into a crossover gait where your step width is narrow and you're basically running on a very narrow line, you're going to be using the arms as ballasts to try and find balance there. So you're probably going to be abducting your arms, but then when you do swing them through, you're going to be crossing the midline. So if you're seeing that these things are harder and harder to correct, it's because some of the patterns your client is using to drive what you went very well into on podcast 136, which was the whole balance system and the maintenance of the upright posture from the perspective of the central nervous system. So, again, I guess we find ourselves pounding sand on arm swing, but it's very important that you understand that it's not only a shaper of the lower limb, but it also is a driver of aberrant mechanics. So it's pretty hard to cross your arms across your body if you're not in thoracic flexion and arm protraction or shoulder or scapular protraction. It's really easy to cross when you're in those bad postures. So if you find that it's very easy and very natural to be doing that, you might want to look at your posture and see what the heck you're doing, because correcting thoracic positioning and get yourself more into a neutral thoracic position and scapular set position where you are more powerful, you're going to find it's a little bit more difficult to cross the midline freely when you're swinging your arms. So I'm sure this is going to make some people mad, but that's what we find clinically, and that's what biomechanically seems to be the rule. So